I'm Bob Bordone. I'm the founder of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute and also the founder of Harvard Law School's Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program. And today I want to offer some short, sweet, actionable advice about how to deal with conflict situations and hard conversations that you might be dealing with at holiday time. So, amidst all of the family time, there's inevitably going to be some moments when you and your sibling are disagreeing about what football game to watch, or maybe your aunt has some pretty extreme political views, or maybe you're just really sick of your little cousins and you need to figure out what to do. I'm going to offer three pieces of advice here. The first one will sound really simple and simplistic, but it's really powerful. And it's the power of taking a pause and breathing. In my latest book, Conflict Resilience, Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In, my colleague, who's a neurologist in brain science, points out the power of actually taking a breath and then pausing before responding. So here's why that matters. When we are triggered in a conflict because maybe of an offensive comment that's made or some kind of annoying behavior, our tendency in our brain is that the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain, releases a whole bunch of chemicals that override the frontal lobe and the limbic centers, the more cognitive, the more mindful centers. And in that moment, if we then allow that override to happen, what we call limbic irritability, that's when we end up either saying something really stupid or maybe caving in or maybe actually accelerating it. So the research has shown that just taking a pause, like literally 15 or 20 seconds, breathing in deeply and then breathing out. And as we're doing that, naming to ourselves, what are the emotions you are feeling? That experience reduces the amount of time that this period of limbic irritability is happening. It allows the more purposive part of our brain to take control. It actually brings our blood rate, it actually brings our heart rate down. It actually allows us to be more purposive. So this is also called affective labeling, meaning that we're naming the emotions to ourselves rather than letting them play out in an unproductive way. Second piece of advice I want to offer here is asking questions instead of making statements. So in that moment, when your cousin says something that you think is really dumb or really offensive or really annoying, our instinct might be to fight back and to come back with a counter retort. But a better way to handle this from a negotiation perspective is to ask an open-ended question. So what might that look like? Saying something like, wow, I'm surprised to hear that. Help me understand a little bit more about how you've come to see it that way. Or it sounds like you have some really strong views on that. Help me appreciate where they're coming from more. Or, gosh, I've heard some different things. I want to understand where you learned that. All of those kinds of questions will keep the conversation going in a way that doesn't have you cave in, but also doesn't actually escalate it. And if the question is driven by a real sense of curiosity, there's actually a chance you might learn something. You might not be persuaded, but it'll be more interesting. So the key here is coming from a place of curiosity. And if you can do that really well, there's this chance that you'll actually learn something you didn't already know. Even if you don't do that, there's some other upsides because the open-ended question and the curiosity actually enables them to get out of their moment of limbic irritability and actually forces them to think, take a pause, and then give a considered response. So before we go into tip number 3, let me just say, I just came up with a bonus tip that I'm going to tell you at the end, which I think makes a real difference. But first, tip number 3, because what do you do if you actually do want to say something as opposed to just listen, as opposed to not escalate? So I want to give some key phraseology that I think will help you Be assertive in a way that's effective and that isn't aggressive. So here are some things you might say. So instead of saying something like, I completely disagree or you're wrong, say something like this. I wonder if it would be okay if I share how I often view this. Or, I think there's some other ways of looking at it. Or, from my perspective and experience, here's how I often view an issue like this. Or, to be honest, I see it somewhat differently. Each of these is effectively assertive. It's signaling your disagreement, but it's not eliciting some kind of an emotional response like you're dumb, you're stupid, you're wrong. All of those phraseologies are more inviting and yet quite assertive. Okay, the last really important piece of advice I want to share with you, and it's one I have to remind myself all the time when I go home at the holidays, and that is expect mistakes. The reality is that when we go back to our families of origin, there are some well-worn patterns that are really easy to fall into. These ruts of escalation, of feeling bad about ourselves, of attack. And while the first three pieces of advice I gave you, I think will make a world of difference, it is absolutely normal that at some point during the weekend, you might just lose it. And that's okay. So being gentle with yourself, expect mistakes, and allow there to be forgiveness for yourself and others in the conversation. So for more advice on how to handle really tough negotiations during the holidays, be sure to pick up my new book, Conflict Resilience. You could also get it as a holiday gift for friends and family. It's an easy read, it's a fun read, and it's going to make your holidays so much more fun. See you next time.